Hello, everybody. Welcome to me clearing my throat. Out on a wander. Except I know where I'm at, or I think I do. And this is really what I want to talk about. Thinking that we know things. There's many old stories where some kind of trouble was introduced into the world along with us, we humans. And there's a little male bumblebee here. That might need some warmth. One of his wings has become damaged. I'm going to try to find a sunny place. It's on my finger now, where he can warm up and perhaps get some nectar that may help him. Now, I don't know what's going on with the male on my fingertip, though I know it's a male. Biologically, it's easy to understand the difference because I've learned things about how to recognize categories. I know words. I know words like male and female. But knowing something fundamental about gender is very different from knowing the words and the societal connotations, the human connotations of the words. Now, the bumblebee, I was not expecting to encounter him. I had an agenda in my mind of what I would talk about and where I might wander when I found him. And I could see that he was in some trouble. He may be dying. But even if he is dying, and even if I cannot save him, in this moment we are together. And I am biding with him. And I am risking, he may be stingless. This is something I don't know, whether the males have stingers or not in the bumblebee family. But he's doing the dance that implies, whoops, he fell off. But he fell in a way that's all right. And he's in the sunlight, which is good because before he was in the darkness. And in the darkness, it can be very difficult for him to loosen his metabolism so that it flows again. And he's done exactly what I was hoping. So I was going to bring him to a flower where he could get some nectar. And when he fell off my finger, we were at some little sage flowers. And now he's getting some nectar, and he even seemed to be drinking some sweat off my fingers. And now he's getting little bits of moisture off of the plants. And he's much more active. And the fact that he's drinking nectar gives me hope that he might return to the air today. And maybe even eventually to his nest. Yeah. When I found him, he was exhausted. See, this is the thing. And I could see that he was exhausted. And so I put my finger down on the ground. You know, I'm a big creature compared to him. Probably, I don't know, 50,000 times his mass. It would be like a living mountain reaching down out of the sky. But in his way, he understood my intention, you see. And none of this had to do with language, even though we can frame it in language. It's so good to see him drinking the nectar from the sage plant, which is where I was taking him. Because I know that in the sunlight, with the nectar, he's got a chance. Yeah. And he's very active, he's not flying yet. But when I put my finger down next to him, do you think he knew what I was? Do you think he thought, this is a giant human being, this is a male human being? No. In order to navigate in the world of the bees and the animals and the plants and the insects, it's not names or categories that are important, although they play a role. It's something deeper. I think he recognized that my intent was loving. I care for him. And so he took a big risk. Yeah. Climbing on my finger, he barely had the energy to cling to my finger. Now he's still navigating in the flowers, getting nectar. It may be that his wing is too damaged for him to fly. It's not clear. He's not making an attempt to fly yet. But when he was on my finger, he was preening. It's a good sign. Preening is a preparation for the attempt to fly again. And you know, it's not clear that I can save his life. If it is his time to die, he will die. But I can show him care. And I can bide with him in difficulty. But just a few minutes of my time could be the difference between life and death for him. And even if it is not the difference between life and death, it's the difference between a world of forces and factors and a world of beings who care for one another. And I definitely care for him. He's not a stranger to me, even though we've just met. I love his people, you see. And this is what I was going to talk about. We humans have problems with abstract knowledge, categories, characteristics. That's a tree, this is an insect, that's a human, this is a living place, or this is just a park, or this is just a parking lot, or this is just a building. The just word is really a problem for us, because in a way it cuts off the infinities that surround each being, and in fact, there are two different branches of identity, at least. Right? If we pare them down to essentials, and this is, see, this is the whole problem. What's the essential thing about something we're relating with? Well, in the left hemisphere's view, so to speak, it's not purely true, the essential thing is its name and its category. That is a mint plant. That's a spearmint plant. You know? And then there are some qualities associated with spearmint. One can make tea or chew the leaves. It's in candy. Maybe it's a rhizome, I'm not sure. There's biological classifications, clinical classifications. And these are all easily grasped and manipulable, and they seem complete. And because they seem complete, this aspect of our consciousness that I associate with the left hemisphere, right side of the body, really prefers this mode of things because there's nothing unknown. And it can go on to whatever it wanted to categorize and evaluate and measure and account for next. But then there's another form of knowing that comes way before all of this and was largely evicted by the onset of all of this. And that way of knowing is intimacy, or at least this is one of the words I use to talk about it. And what passed between me and the bumblebee was intimacy. I don't know what it is, even though I can name it. But what I see when the bumblebee is struggling in the shade on the pavement is an opportunity for reunion, an opportunity to embody something beyond knowledge, the original light. Now, in this other way of knowing, what someone or something is barely begins at the category and extends deep into the impossible beauty of being embodied, alive together in sunlight on a world with atmosphere, a world so safe, so protective, that creatures here had the time to develop elaborate physical embodiments, the octopus, the whale, our eyes, our hands, the wings, the scales, the claws, the teeth, all of these things, our ears, our noses, scent. This is a very precious and rare world, even if there are many worlds with life. Hello. Our world is a paradise. At least, for the moment, it remains a paradise. And it's very clear to me that the development of organisms is punctuated by extinction events, where nearly everything is killed. All or almost all the complex animals die. And there might be a few little islands here and there that survive, deep within the earth, underwater, high in the mountains. It's possible. But most worlds are unstable. And so the opportunity to develop elaborate physicality and relationality is limited. You have to have incredible luxury to be able to develop an animal like us. We're almost what's that word? We are the dividend of the incredible, staggering, astonishing stability of Earth's biosphere. So what I wanted to talk about today is an idea that I've touched on in a number of previous videos and wanderings. but I want to play with it in a specific way. So I have this this concept that was taught to me by a non-human intelligence. And I assure you, it was extremely astonishing. The way it showed me, it wasn't showing me in language, it showed me by moving my mind to its perspective so that I could share in that perspective directly. And what it showed me, or what let's see, how shall I put this? My translation of what I was shown was the development of a concept called holophores. And holophores are root ideas that inflect our understanding and experience of identity cognitively, right? What we think things are and do and are for and so on. And over time, our holophores became tokenized. Initially, they had diverse dimensionality, so that we would never simply believe the concept, right? Much as when we're dreaming, identity has diverse and unusual dimensionality, so too the holophores, the sun, an organism, mother, dreaming, hand, eye, friend, food, all these things, they had forests of meaningful dimensionality or dimensions of meaning, right? It was impossible for them to be abstract for most of human history. But over time, in waves, as societies developed, and language developed, technologies developed, we lost that dimensionality and the holophores became flattened. And they flattened in particular directions, right? One of them was that the humans are supreme in nature. And while that's not untrue, it's a crippling idea. It will destroy our minds and our ability to relate with ourselves and life if we believe the imprint of the token as it presently exists, commonly. So, it turns out that underneath all of our structured knowledge and awareness, there are these tokenized holophores, and they're badly damaged. They're like broken algorithms, right? That every time they start to branch toward meaningful dimensionality, they crash. They crash into their own incomplete structure. And the projection of its completeness in consciousness, meaning that, if I know that's a tree, that's enough. That's all I need to know today to determine whether I have to pay attention or not, or how I'll pay attention, so on. So our holophores are broken, all of them. And thus, our cognition is damaged, right, in this way. Hi. It's okay.
There's like a ton of different paths.
Hi.
Want to branch out? Do you know? Are you sure?
She's asking the children if they know where they're going. You can see the problem right there. Then she's asking, are you sure? Right? Are you sure that's a tree? Are you sure you know? It's easy to be sure that we know if knowledge has become so flat and tokenized that all we have to do is determine which category something belongs to, and then we're pretty much done. We can determine whether how we should interact with it or if we should interact with it. Except that our categories are all dead inside. So mostly we don't have to interact with anything except machines, right? And machines are part of the product of this problem. But I want to return, the catalog of holophores from which everything inherits meaning and identity, or not, is broad. There are many. If someone said name 7, I could do that. I could name 7 really important ones. What is the universe? What is the sun? What is the world? What is birth? What are beings? What is a companion? What is dreaming? There are many other important ones. What is seeing? What is knowing? But I want to just play briefly today with one. What is a being? Well, this is the most general category, right? It's the category above organism. Okay? Organism is a form of being. But I just want to talk about our capacity to repair our holophores. And one of the really important, for me, experiences of that repair that happened even before my mind was transformed. And it was this. I began to think of all the diverse forms of life on Earth first as fully fledged beings, right? Every plant, every insect, every animal, every living place, every microbe. And also, it was clear to me that their relationships formed another dimension of being, right? So that they really are only beings together. You know, you could take all the bees in the world and put them in a box, and they would die right away, right? Because without the living world, the bees aren't bees. In order to be bees, they need all of their companions, and even their threats. Yeah. Even what we think of as their competitors or enemies. So first I learned to think of all of the life forms as beings, and then I realized that they are not beings alone, they are beings together, like the organs of a single body, yeah, all of them. And you need all the organs. There are no bad organs in the body. And that was a beginning. That made me understand the world as more than a being, as something we don't actually have a category in language for. A close but weird category would be angel or God. But it's possible to think beyond categories. We can think in ways that we have no category for, so that I can see, for example, that the world is a biorelational hyperstructure, more than a being, filled with organs that each express unique aspects of its character and activity. And also, similarly, it's a time being. It's a very astonishing, multi-layered, temporalizing context. It makes time. It makes forms of time. Each possible and actual form of relation is a form of time. And each of those forms have different characters and paces and tempos and tones and rhythms and meaningfulness and purposiveness. So with these movements, my idea of what a being is and what an organism is began to change. And it changed in such a way as to reacquire dimensionality that my culture had disposed of with clinical ideas and language. And this is the great danger of our language and the way that we're involved with language. It's deeply troubling. It nearly explicitly precludes the possibility of something resembling intelligence. Intelligence requires freedom in the dimensions of being. Freedom to see and participate, to understand, to speak of, to explore, to invent, to go beyond. So that was one of the first transformations that happened. And then there was a later transformation in which I began to think of each of the beings that I encounter in my life, the plants and animals and insects and living places, the humans. Of course, I always thought of the humans this way. We're trained to do that. But I began to think of each of the animal forms as peoples. Right? So instead of just thinking about the ants or the wasps, I thought about the ant peoples. The wasp peoples, the flower peoples, the sage peoples, the rosemary people, the oregano people, the birch people, the oak people, the raccoon people, the skunk people, the opossum people, the bear people, the badger people, the beaver people, the otter people, the butterfly people, the orchid people, the whale people, the dolphin people, the octopus people, the crow people, the raven people, the bat people, the spider people, scorpion people, centipede people. All of these beings as peoples, and each of the peoples as the present embodiment of an astonishing lineage of beings and relationships. Right? The beings are not alone. The peoples are never alone. You only get them together. Only come on a world where they're all together, like ours. And this changed everything. This one shift from thinking about living beings as things, right? You know, people will say, oh no, a bee is a creature, but they think of creatures as things. They don't think of them as peoples. But to me, it's not merely thinking. I'm not just thinking, oh, these are peoples. I'm feeling them as peoples. So when I walk through the garden, I'm in a family all together, right? And there's competition, and there's violence, and there's predation, and there's disease, and the humans are insane and just go around wiping things out for all kinds of confused reasons. So it's almost as if the humans who think of themselves as the people have become the unpeople because of something in their mind. Something is broken in their minds. And the brokenness has to do with language and categories. It has to do with formal representational cognition. And problems with that evolve over time. They develop over time into deadly misapprehensions. Now, I'm not trying to convince anyone to make the same change in their holophores that happened to me. And honestly, it was only partly volitional. It wasn't as if I tried to change the holophore, though I was intending to try to understand more deeply, to see more clearly, to know more richly than language ordinarily allows for. I was trying for that. I still remember the feeling of the male bumblebee's tongue on my skin. Such a tiny, tiny thing, yet I could feel the wetness of his tongue as he was absorbing a little bit of moisture from my skin surface, my sweat. And when you think of this, you will understand something very profound. When I reached down my finger and he climbed on, that was a moment of great bravery for him, but also of intimate sensing. He could sense this being is offering me aid. It's offering me care. It doesn't have to know what I am. It merely knows my intention or something of it. And it had to know that because at first it avoided my finger a few times. And then after, some encounters with my finger, it climbed on. What a brave moment. But in that moment, we joined together. Some of my body is now inside that bee. It's now inside that bee's people. And there was a transfer between our people and the bumblebee people. It happened there. And that's truly beautiful. In our life, we think about things we want to accomplish. Many of those things are meaningless. But when there's a transfer of care between beings, then the old agreements, the original agreements between the beings, which are still made and renewed in our modern situation, even though they originated long ago, those agreements are honored and renewed. And that's a real accomplishment. That's something I can deeply trust. It's beyond categories. It's beyond evaluation. It's beyond accounting games. Now I am with the bumblebee people. And they're with me. And we are together. And perhaps part of why the bee was willing to take the risk of climbing on my finger is because I've had many such transfers with the bee people and wasp people and other peoples that are related, the hymenoptera, in the category language. Funny word that, hymenoptera. The female insects. The matriarchal insect societies. Except that matriarchal is probably the wrong word here. And really, we should be cautious about forming fairy tale narratives. Though that can also be useful, we just wouldn't want to be misled. The hymenopteran societies, they are extremely severe in their ways, in some ways, and extremely beautiful in others. They are both. If we are looking with an eye that evaluates such things, if we are looking with a clear eye, there is no need for such evaluations. We simply understand, yes, the bee people as they are. Right here with me now. Not in my memory, not in my thought, in the moment. So for me, this transformation of a fundamental holophore, right, that organisms are peoples and lineages and relationships, it opened doorways in my mind that otherwise might have remained closed, even though I had an intuitive sense of their truth and necessity, right? still my human thinking would dominate that sense most of the time, and even today it still does again. I've fallen twice into this trap, once in my birth and once in my adulthood, where I reacquire the overlay, or I acquire or reacquire the overlays, the conceptual, categorical, linguistic overlays. There's probably a language, and if there isn't, there was, that in the word for any being included either the explicit or the implied component of meaning that tells you this is a people. The gum trees are a people. The rosemary plant is a people. And of course, the rosemary plant is a person of the people. Right? It's a unique instance of a distributed organ in the living world. So this is an example for me of the partial repair of a holophore, where I finally really understood in a way that, though it could be buried again by language and categories, accounting and clinical thought, it could be relost. But in my life it was renewed. Now, little children understand all these things because they've not acquired the amputations that come with formal representational thinking. And so we can recover, like the little children, they're like, in a sense, they're like pollinators. They can transfer the pollen of the original light back into those adults and other children and teenagers and elderly people and so on who have lost it, or who it's become very buried and overwrought within. They carry the original light. And some of the adults preserve some of that original light. But today what I want to ask you to think about is recovering together some of the dimensionality of the fundamental roots of meaning in the landscape of identity as we think about it. When I become very soft, it's entirely clear to me that I don't want to harm another being at all, in any way. But suppose that we have the world fundamentally upside down or backwards, and I promise you this is the case with most of how we think. Suppose that all of the living beings are inside me first, and their appearance as external is a strange kind of illusion. Now it becomes intimately clear that harming other beings is harming myself. And this isn't explicit, right? It's a guiding principle that has play in it, in the sense that all beings eat food. Now, you can look at the different peoples and you will notice some of them appear fundamentally benevolent. Not only do they not harm other beings, they aid them, always. And even in harming other beings, their lineages are aided, right? In the relationship between a prey being and a predator being. But it's pretty hard to see, how trees harm things. They give life and food and shelter to myriads of beings. And we could, get clinical scientifically and say, well, they produce chemistries that kill moth larvae and so on and so forth. Yeah, sure. They have something resembling an immune system, right? A self and other. But there are many beings that really, compared, for example, to human beings, do very little harm, if any. I mean, the bees will fight to preserve their hives, and there's competition and behavior that appears cruel within the hives. The males are not particularly... Well, it's weird. First they're coddled, then they're disposed of. They're coddled until mating day. They don't have to really do any work. They're fed, they're cared for, they're nurtured. But then on mating day, boom, ejected from the hive. No more togetherness. It's their last day on Earth. They won't last more than a day or two at most without the hive. But I want to go back to this idea that the whole world is fundamentally inside me, that all these beings, and not just the beings who are alive, all the beings who have ever lived, and somehow, we might think even magically, all the beings who ever will live, and not just those beings on Earth, all the beings. They're fundamentally inside me. This is a transformation of the holophore of personhood, right? I am a person, I am separate. I am in the world. The world is a container. Everything in the world is outside me. Right? Can't be true. There's no way it's true. Impossible for this to be true. Yet we think like this all the time. And we don't recognize the transfers. When beings give their lives to become our food. When we pick up microbes from the environment, At least probably half the cells in our bodies are not from our gene line, they're from the world. And some of those microbes have been transferred lineage to lineage, mother to child, mother to child, mother to child. And father to child, father to child, father to child. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that, in truth, the entire world of beings is inside you. What I'm trying to say is that perspective will serve you better, in general, by far, than the perspective that the beings are outside you, and that you are separate from them, which certainly cannot be true. If you take away all the beings, you die right now. All the beings come together. But for me, learning that they were peoples meant that I could discover ways to relate between my people and their people that were mutually beneficial and beautiful, trustworthy, intimate, deeply profound, loving, caring, recognition, mutual awareness, mutual concern, mutual wonder, mutual love. And so this is an example of the partial repair of a holophore. What are people? Right? What are beings? It affects everything, though. This is the unique thing about holophores. It affects what the sun is, what the moon is, what food is, what seeing is, what my hand is, what dreaming is. If you repair any of the holophores even slightly, all the other holophores and all their derivatives inherit the correction. And this represents something like a non-ordinary cognitive technology. As we repair our holophores, we regain the capacity for something resembling actual intelligence. And as they continue to be tokenized, flattened, denuded, our minds die. And in the grasp of our minds, in the iron grip of representational cognition, our souls suffocate. There's no relational oxygen in there. It's not inhabitable, that space. Now, the holophore is a derivative of the uniphore, or any holophore is a derivative of the uniphore. And the uniphore is what we think everything is and is doing. And it seems that most of us have a pretty crude, very tokenized idea about this. What the everything is. And, honestly, you don't want an idea. You don't want a token. In the same way, if I love a woman romantically, I don't want an idea of her or a photograph of her. I want to be with her. Right? I want to be together with her in our minds, in our hearts, sometimes in our bodies. I want to eat food with her, sing with her, dance with her, create with her, learn with her, grow with her, be hurt with her, be sick with her, perhaps die with her. None of that is knowledge, or if it is, it's the old kind. So we should be very careful with these modern forms of knowledge. Most of them are toxic. They're very domineering. They tend to overwhelm our capacity for insight and relation, intelligence and discovery, creativity and humanity. But there's a door in the prison. Many doors, in fact. And one of them is the recognition that our holophores have undergone this process of becoming tokenized, by which I mean like turned into coins, right? Representations that are insufficient as vehicles for our cognition and interiority. Perhaps you may experiment with the holophore of organisms and see what you can recover. And see if you agree with me someday that each of the living beings are peoples and lineages, and that we can learn how to relate with them in ways that make our fantasy and science fiction look timid in comparison. For that is our actual nature, I believe. And that is the opportunity that we have. One of the opportunities, a crucial one, to learn how to be human again in a living world together. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye for now.